This is your home for St. Cloud State hockey, keeping you up to date on the NCHC.
One-timer coming, they score! Ripped in! A bomb from Pervix!
Women's WCHA.
So Dana Rasmussen fires and she scores! Dana Rasmussen for the Huskies alongside
The National Hockey League.
Dwayne Kaprizov in for a chance to win it! He scores! Kirill, the thrill is for real! Welcome to the NHL, a game winner!
And everything from the state of hockey.
St. Cloud Cathedral is now 42.6 seconds away from wrapping up the school's first ever title.
Welcome to the Huskies Warming House Podcast Den. Welcome into episode number 71 of the Healthy Scratch interview segment. I'm Noah Grant, joined alongside my co-host Nick Maxon, who's giving me the stink eye for that intro. How'd you feel about that one, Nick? You thought that one wasn't so smooth? I don't know, but
no, it's fine. I thought I heard the door open, and it's funny because it's July, not Halloween just yet. So I can't even tell you right now. Just some things just make you nervous, and apparently that did, whatever that noise was.
Well, so. If you want to know, I wear my Halloween costume year round. It's pretty scary to everybody.
Oh, me too.
Yeah, but nonetheless, if you're joining us on the YouTube and seeing our Halloween faces, congratulations. Thanks for joining us. If you're listening on the audio version, we got a great interview coming up here. A bit of a more somber one, but it was a very, very well said discussion. Our guest with Mick Hatten from the Rink Live did a fantastic job talking about specifically the Bob Motzko and Mack Motzko situation, and of course. Obviously hit us near and dear. We had a great discussion with Bob last summer around this time. He was able to jump on the show, and kind of one of the more funnier moments that maybe we'll kind of touch on after the show ends regarding our show about our interactions with Bob, and a great time that we had as well. But Nick, kind of a unique interview from what we normally do, trying to keep things light and jovial, and that's just what it is. What were your impressions with Mick joining us tonight?
So first, a little bit of chatter with Jack Pert, or at least that's what we think his last name is pronounced, right?
Yeah.
His recent draft, hometown Minnesota Wild draft. Obviously, we touch on Jack and maybe some where we see him as far as the Huskies will have him in the lineup this upcoming season. A lot of what a year he's had, right? As far as both on and off the ice. But no, we'll talk obviously in the interview, but there are moments in life that. It was whatever it is, the hockey sticks come down, the gloves stay on, and, you just all kind of, you gather around each other, and you just, all you can do is really be there for each other, right? There's no easy way to talk about the tragedy that is of what we have unfortunately heard just about a week ago, right, with Bob's son Mack and his passing. These are situations where, as a journalist in training, I should say, and you as well, Noah, being on the radio yourself and doing some things as well, and us doing this podcast for some time, these are moments where, at least I feel, having discussions about it, although it may not be easy, can certainly help those, throughout the process. It helps to share that, I think there's many people in the same boat, whereas emotionally or, how's he fit? And I think it's also good to know that, this sort of situation doesn't define who Mack was. We're certainly not going to be remembered for this. He's going to be remembered for the kid who he was, both on and off the ice. And Mick definitely has a lot of great story to tell with him on this. And so it's a fantastic interview. And, as he said it very eloquently earlier, Noah, even as journalists, we're all at the end of the day, we're all human beings, right? And I think, when these sort of things come around and, they're unfortunate when they do, to have the discussion about it, to talk about it, as just a human being and not a journalist, I think is very therapeutic for a lot of people.
Yeah, I will definitely agree. If I can add a quick aside here, I know that in my high school, the 4 years that I was in high school, we had 4 people actually in our small town under the age of 20 that passed away from auto-related accidents during that span. And with situations like this, it never gets any easier, but I think that we can find a little bit of catharsis or a little bit of something, a little bit of healing in terms of being able to listen and discuss and be around each other, like you said. And this is, I don't know if it's one of the best interviews we've ever done, but sitting down and listening to Mick talk about it, especially so recently after the tragedy, I think was really important and really in some ways needed for all of us, especially I think I speak for you and Mick both when I say that as well, because I felt that where I feel a little bit more at ease being able to discuss it. And we're not going to keep you waiting. Our fantastic interview with Mick Hatten for episode number 71.
Welcome back to the Pond, Huskies Warming Notes podcast fans. It is episode number 71, and joining us this week to talk a lot of St. Cloud State Huskies news, we have the Rink Live's Mick Hatten, who covered this team extensively over the years. Mick, again, thank you for joining us, and happy to have you back on for a second time.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Mick, we definitely have a lot of pressing topics to get to today. Let's first start with the better news, we'll call it that, with Jack Pertz, or is it P-Art? I know we talked about this pre-show. There seems to be a pronunciation conundrum that we're in. Nonetheless, the incoming freshman, a second-round choicer by none of the hometown Minnesota Wild. What not a bad way to have your summer start off and get ready to come in as a freshman for the Huskies.
Yeah, very exciting news for Jack. And that was that was a fun conversation. With him. I was on the Zoom call with him after he got drafted on Saturday morning. There was some back and forth as to whether or not if you saw some of the mock drafts, and I realize these things fluctuate 8 billion different ways and everything else, but. There were some people saying that he was going to go as early as late in the first round on Friday. That didn't happen. I'm trying to imagine as a player what that's like going through that, because I was sitting there watching and I kept waiting and waiting to hear his name at 26, 27, and you don't hear it. And so I'm imagining what that's like. Then you got to sit, sleep through a night and then get up in the morning and then kind of start the whole process again. But, yeah, great news for him. He was super excited that to be going to the Wild for obvious reasons. The cool thing, of course, is the assistant. I'm trying to remember his exact spot. He's essentially he helps with player development. Assistant to the director of player development, I think, is the official name for. The job for Matt Hendricks, who's a former St. Cloud State player. I heard actually they kept me on the Zoom a little bit longer than they probably should have, but I actually heard Matt kind of talking with Jack a little bit, and Jack was even more excited when he was talking with him and Brad Bombardier a little bit after the interviews. And so, yeah, very cool. What an amazing year the kid had. I tried to document, I guess, as much of it as I can, with starting off with the Fargo Force and then going back to his Grand Rapids team. And then he gets named Mr. Hockey, wins the Reed Larson Award. His stock, when he was with the Fargo Force, just kept going up. I was shocked to hear, because if you remember back to, when the first rankings came out, NHL Central Scouting comes out with rankings at different points. One is kind of before the season, and one is after the season gets over. When before the season started, he was actually a C-rated, player, which meant he was projected to go between the 4th and the 6th rounds. And then when he decided to go back to Grand Rapids, I remember talking with Kerry Eads from the Fargo Force, and Kerry said, well, first of all, he said he's the best defenseman that we've had in Fargo. Now, for people who follow Fargo Force even a little bit, like that includes a guy like Nate Schmidt, right? So, I mean, pretty high praise. Yeah. And Kerry's just the type of guy that doesn't just throw stuff around like that. And so when he said that opened my eyes, and I asked him where he thought he was going to what he was hearing, I guess, in terms of the draft, and he said he's probably going to go in the first round, and I just about fell over. And then he said, "Well, we'll see what happens once he goes back to Grand Rapids, because sometimes guys go backwards a little bit when they in draft projections, just because the competition changes and their roles change on high school teams versus the teams in juniors." But Jack ended up coming back. He played great in the playoffs. Helped them get all the way to Clark Cup finals, and he's a very I can't remember if you guys have talked to him yet or not, but he's a very laid back and subdued kind of guy. If you guys have ever interviewed Nick Jensen from the Capitals, another former St. Cloud State great, his demeanor kind of reminds me a little bit of Nick. I mean, he's just very calm and he's very direct. He's very polite, but he's not going to overwhelm you with his personality necessarily right out of the gates, just because he's got a real professional kind of air about him, I guess is the way I describe him. Just in talking with him, whatever it's been 4 or 5 times now. But great news for him. Great news for the university. I think it's in my story, but I think he's the 7th highest player to get drafted by, 7th highest at St. Cloud State to get drafted. And a lot of people saying a lot of great things about him.
Yeah, he's from what I had discovered, he's only I think he's one of only 4 defensemen to go before the 4th round for the St. Cloud State Huskies as well too. Mick, before we transition into our next topic, first of all, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. And your show is what we would call the more professional show, which apparently it's your job, so that's important, I would say. I kind of wanted to ask throughout the past year, how have you been doing lately? You've gotten into the podcast game, albeit probably more successfully than we have. And how have things been going otherwise, covering some St. Cloud State hockey?
Well, it was an unbelievable year, obviously, with covering St. Cloud State hockey. With the unbelievable run, obviously, that they went to, in the NCAA tournament. It was an odd year. Like I didn't, part of, with my job, with the way it is right now, I didn't anticipate, I don't anticipate like covering as many games as I ended up covering this past season. Just with the NCHC pod, it kind of started off where, the company decided to send me down there for the whole 3+ weeks or whatever it was that the pod went on. So I got to see every game down there, and I saw, I covered most of the games, I guess, during the course of the season, and I didn't anticipate that I was going to do that. So I was a little bit more hands-on from that standpoint. It was a weird year. Like I kept, I was very worried. Like if you had talked to me a year ago with all the stuff going on with COVID, I would have been really concerned about my job just because I'm like, well, nobody knows anything. And there were all kinds of media people, losing their jobs. And so I'm very grateful, I guess, that to this point, knock on wood, I'm still employed, and it's been a really good year. I mean, to be at a Frozen Four and see 3 Minnesota schools there, and the Gophers weren't one of them, was a bit shocking, and it was a cool thing. I've known Mike Hastings for probably around 20 years, and I have nothing but the utmost respect for Mike, and he's had success everywhere he's gone. And so we've all seen, well, you guys may or may not remember, but I mean, I remember when St. Cloud State had gone over and finally won that first NCAA tournament game. So to see Mike kind of go through that almost the same duration of any NCAA tournament drought, and then make it all the way to the Frozen Four, that was exciting to see. And what an amazing semifinals game. I guess that's the other thing, I guess, that it's going to stick out in my mind forever, I guess, is that game was that's about as good an NCAA tournament game as you're going to see from my standpoint. Back and forth, and you think, oh my gosh, they're out of this, and they come back and an amazing tip to win that game. So a lot of good things, and like you said, I'm doing a Huskies podcast, and then Jess and I are doing a podcast that's a little bit broader based than just St. Cloud State. And so we've got a lot of irons in the fire, which is good. And the more irons, the more chance I have of keeping my job. So that's the way I look at it, Noah.
It's better than us shelling out money
Mick,
to do the same thing. So.
Yeah. And then one final quick note on Jack here, Mick, as we look at the Huskies roster entering the 2021-22 season, a lot of returning faces. Again, in Mr. Hockey, I'd imagine he gets a crack maybe at certainly the bottom pairing, but maybe even a top 4 spot. But this Huskies team, when you try to repeat the success you had a year ago, now, as Pat Micheletti said, getting up the mountain is one thing, but staying on the mountain is even tougher. Obviously, with a player as skilled and as composed as Jack, and I got to watch him play the 2019 All-Star Prospects game out there in St. Paul. I was calling that with Gino, and just remember how composed and how smooth of a skater he was. Great decision maker with the puck. He's a guy that fits Brett Larson's system very well. But I guess could you see him potentially cracking a full-time starting role with this squad, even though it's a pretty crowded blue line there for Brett Larson and his squad?
Well, I don't think you bring let's put it this way. I don't think you bring in a kid at 18 years old and a kid that's been a second-round draft pick and have him sit or have him be playing, bottom 3, in the lineup. I know that they're not going to publicly say that, but I'm just telling you from having watched this over the years, you don't bring in a kid at that age with that kind of NHL pedigree and sit him. I think he's going to, I think they'll keep Nick Perbix and Seamus Donahue together just because that was such a great defensive pairing last season. But then I think it'll be interesting to see. I think he'll be in that second defensive pairing. It'll be interesting to see what they decide to run for a power play because Jack's obviously a guy that, could run an umbrella, power play very easily. And Nick Perbix is the type of guy who could also, can do that too. Those two guys are very good puck handlers. So it'll be interesting to see because last season, if you remember, they went kind of old and traditional where they had 2 defensemen back there. Do they go to 1 and then, try to, have 4 other forwards, and run an umbrella? That's going to be interesting to see. I'm very curious to see that side of it, but I think he's going to play a lot of minutes. And from everything, I'll tell you guys this. This is a funny thing. Whenever I talk about Jack with Brett, Brett always, when I ask him, well, what do you think of him, and or what is it you like about him, and he goes, well, he's kind of a mix of the best of Jack Ashawn and Jimmy Schultz. And then he always tries to backtrack on me. And I'm like, he did that again the other day. And I said, but Brett, you've already told me that before. And he's like, oh yeah, I guess I did. And he goes, and that's actually a real compliment to Jack and Jimmy. And I said, yeah, it is, because neither of those guys were drafted. But at the same time, you're comparing them to 2 guys who are all Americans here. So I think that tells you what you need to know, I guess, about what his talent level is. Now, we've all seen guys that come in with all kinds of hype and all kinds of talent and doesn't work out for whatever reason. I don't get the impression that that's going to happen here, but that's good. That's the fun part, I guess, about all sports is actually seeing where everybody lands when they get to the spot that they're supposed to be.
And then, Mick, I think now is the time where we transition. The hockey community is quite the close-knit hockey community. You had mentioned the Gophers earlier. No question that, down I-94, it's usually a heated rivalry. It's a name that you love to hate kind of thing. Within this last week, unfortunately, this is where the hockey community can sort of put our fan differences aside, as you call it, and show, you could say, the sports world just how close and how tight this community is. And this one hits close to home. For those who haven't heard yet, the passing of Bob Motzko's oldest son, Mack, was reported just this past Sunday morning. It shocked all of us. I know here with the Huskies Warmer Dogs Podcast, we were just finished recording our Sunday episode when we were informed of the news. Had to do a couple of checking, you could call it, to see if this indeed was a true story. We ended up having the story confirmed, and just an unbelievably tragic event. And so we are going to spend some time to talk about this, since not only does this deal with the former head coach, St. Cloud State, Bob, but from what we know, Mack was a large part of his presence also in the St. Cloud community. Mick, let's start this chronologically, as we should. When did you hear about the news? And I guess let's start from there.
Yeah, but it was about 9:20, 9:30. I was up north. I have some friends. A friend of mine owns a cabin up in northern Minnesota, and I was up there, and I had my computer with me because of the draft getting moved. Normally it's a month earlier, so I actually had my computer with me. And but I got a text message from somebody, and somebody that I knew was not. Well, they were a trustworthy source. We'll just say that. Somebody from St. Cloud State that that Mack had died in a car accident. And I have to tell you, I got to be honest with you, for I don't know, 3-4 hours, I was just in total shock. I've interviewed Mack. We were talking off air or whatever. I think I've interviewed Mack, 3, maybe 4 times. But I've seen Mack around, the National Hockey Center since he was 10. As I was driving home, and then all of it kind of started to hit me a lot harder, because you get to know coaches, when you deal with people I wouldn't say daily, but on a very regular basis. During the hockey season, I was dealing with Bob for 3-4 days a week easily, and we did that for 8 seasons together. So I've gotten to know Bob over the years, and whenever Bob, what came to mind, I guess, was in particular was there was a time, and I think it was like in the spring, and I needed to come down and talk to him for something. And Mack was probably 13 or 14 years old. And as I was walking into the hockey center, I saw he was out there skating, which happened. He liked to go out. He liked to go out and skate and work on his own at the hockey center. And he was working on some things. And I remember Bob coming in to the coach's office. And when Bob gets excited about something, Bob gets kind of this sly grin on his face, and there's a lot of light to him in these kind of instances. And Bob looked at me and goes, "Mick," he goes, "I think we got something here." And I wasn't sure, if he was talking about a recruit or what exactly he was talking about. And I think I said to him, "Well, what do you mean? You got somebody new coming in?" He goes, "No." He goes, "Mack, he's really starting to come along, and I think he's got a shot, is what he said to me." And it's hard to describe, because Bob's got a good sense of humor, but Bob can be a pretty serious guy most of the time. And but when he talked about Mack, and that was not the exception, that was more kind of the rule. When he talked about Mack, Bob lit up all the time. That's not to say that he doesn't love Ella and Bo. I'm not saying that. I'm just telling you, because we're talking about Mack and his passing, that when he talked about Mack, there was a special bond between those two. When I think it was Brian Demain was saying that. Who's the athletic trainer for the Huskies? For people who don't know, when I was talking with him, he said that, he had Bob's love of hockey, and think about that. I mean, if you've met Bob, if you've talked to Bob, you know how passionate he is about the game, and Mack was that passionate about it. Hopefully, people have read the story or whatever on our website that I did about people remembering him, but he loved being around that team all the time. So I mean, just listening to Jeremiah tell those stories of him being the box monster and chasing him down to the athletic training room, Benanowski pushing him around in a laundry cart, playing, they would, get a tape ball together, and he would play, tape hockey with the St. Cloud State players in the locker room. He was around a lot, but like Brian Demain and Jeremiah Minkle said, he was around all the time, but he was like just a guy that he was never in the way, right? And for kids at that age to not be in the way, and this is nothing against my kids or anybody else's kids, but that's just not the general nature of him. But he had a way about him that was special that way. And there were some very tough interviews, for that story. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I got through, a few of them without, shedding some tears, because it hits you in a lot of different ways when something this awful happens to somebody who I've never heard a bad word about the kid. I just never have. And being in the business that I'm in, and think about this. All right. Your dad is the Division I hockey coach in town. People are always looking for reasons to pick you apart. They just are, right? You got a target on you because your dad is one of the big dogs in town and everything else. I've never heard somebody say a bad thing about Mack. So it just says so much about the character of the kid, and about who he was. I've heard people say, he was, he had an old soul, like he liked talking to adults even at a young age. And he liked sitting around, and Eric Root said that he liked sitting around and listening to Bob and Eric and Mike Gibbons sit there and, tell hockey stories. He loved just being around all that stuff. And so it's a tough blow. And on top of that, I mean, I just having written about him in his high school years, what people at Cathedral say about him, it's even higher praise. I mean, they thought the world of Mack.
Yeah, the follow-up question I kind of had to that, Mick, you talk about interviews and what people say, have said about Mack. The one perspective that I kind of wanted to get is you've had a couple of times personally, I believe, that you've gotten a chance to deal with him and actually interview him for hockey, among other things. What were your impressions like of him and kind of the little that you got to get to know him in your job? He may have been the most mature 18-year-old kid I've ever interviewed. He had a real professionalism, I guess, is the best way I guess I could describe how he kind of went about his things. The cool thing was the last time I interviewed him, which was in 2020 before the state tournament,
I got him to open up a little bit about some different things. And I think he finally gotten a little bit more comfortable with just talking with me and everything else. And I got him to tell the story about when his dad took the job and how mad he was that his dad was going to the Gophers, because he loved St. Cloud State. And it's hard to really hammer that home more than I don't know how you can hammer that home more, that the kid just loved St. Cloud State and he loved the Huskies. I mean, that was where he grew up. That's all he knew, right? Was red and black. And so for his dad to take the job at Minnesota was just something that was almost beyond him. And so, yeah, but when I interviewed him, he had a good sense of humor, when you could get him to, kind of let his barrier down a little bit. And you could tell he was extremely knowledgeable about the game. That there was just no way around that. I mean, that came across in red letters. I think in the story I wrote, Robbie Stocker, who's the new Cathedral coach, he said when he dealt with him as a 14-year-old, that it was like coaching an adult. Matt Chapman, who is the ticket manager now for St. Cloud State, he worked at some hockey camps with them, and he talked about when he was a squirt, all the other kids are kind of off running around, and he's trying to corral them to get them to do the drill right. And there's Max standing in the exact same spot he's supposed to be in every time, doing the drill exactly the way he's supposed to. So that's kind of like what he was maybe like a little bit around the rink. And the respect that coaches had for him, it's just, I've never heard coaches talk about a high school kid like that. I mean, the closest I think I've heard somebody talk like this, they did about Mack, was about Jimmy Schultz. I remember when Jimmy was getting ready to come to St. Cloud State, I talked to the Minnetonka high school coach at the time, and he said, Jimmy's going to wear a letter at St. Cloud State before he's done. That kind of just stood me up. And of course he ended up being a captain for 3 years. But that's kind of the class of person. Again, if people have met Jimmy Schultz, maybe that's a good kind of gauge of like the type of person that if you didn't meet Mack gave kind of that same aura about him. And so he was something. And I was at Hockey Zone yesterday. My son's skate sharp, and I was talking with one of the guys that worked there, and he goes, you didn't have to talk to Mack very long to know what he was about, and the type of person he was. You just didn't have to be around him that long. That's how evident, he just projected that. I don't know how, it's hard to really pinpoint it, but you would know it if you saw it. Let's just say that.
No question that I think, St. Cloud may have been possibly in his future, maybe on the ice, maybe not. I know that there were plans for him to, I think Penticton, if I recall correctly, was in the fall plans for him up in the British Columbia Hockey League. But Mick, it's time to talk a little bit some of the details of what happened, right? So whether it's an accident or whatnot, these things are always tough, right? But I think the circumstances surrounding this situation are why I think this pill's a little bit tougher to swallow. For those who don't know, just a quick summary, then I'll let you fill in the gaps. It sounds like, 51-year-old James Blue was the driver. Again, he's a resident of Orono. From what we know is that there was an invitation of a party at his place after they were at Maynard's earlier in the evening. And before some folks maybe were headed out, he offered to take a folks ride in what was supposed to be a quick ride in a new vehicle. From what we know about the accident report, or at least the initial disclosures, where that speed and possibly alcohol were involved in this collision. It wasn't very far away that led to the incident. Now, Mick, I'll have you kind of take it from there, but that, I guess, kind of briefly summarize it, but still a lot of details there that I'll have you sort of expand on.
Yeah, well, I talked to a lot of people, even on that Sunday. I know a guy I used to work with, covered cops and stuff a lot, and he started digging up some details, piecing some things together, just from different tweets and different things that he saw online. And, he pretty early on, he said, let's just say this. He goes, that's not a road that you should be doing, be driving that fast on. The speed limit, I think, where the accident happened was 40 miles an hour from what I've been told. And he, by some accounts that we've heard, they said that the cops definitely said that speed was involved with it. Okay. They said speed and alcohol were likely involved with the accident. Have heard things that it was, may have been 90, 100 miles an hour. And, the road kind of curves, where the car went off the road, and then they hit multiple trees. And unfortunately Mack and Joe Schoeneman were both wearing their seat belts, but when you stop that abruptly at that speed, unfortunately, the internal stuff that goes on there, from that sort of impact at that speed is just horrific. Now, James Blue got thrown from the car, and unfortunately, Joe died at the scene. Mack was. I've heard different reports as to how he got to the hospital, but he was taken to the hospital and eventually died at the hospital. Bob and his wife Shelley and their son Bo were up at Gull Lake, and I've heard that Bob and Shelley flew to the Twin Cities. That Bo got picked up, taken down to the Twin Cities, and they were able to see him in the hospital before he died. But just the more details you hear and about the whole situation, the more troubling it is, just because it was so avoidable. I guess that's the best way I can put it. I mean, it's just so troubling because it just didn't need to happen. And we don't know, I guess, if they necessarily knew. I don't know if, I don't think Mack knew these guys, knew him or whatever before this evening. So it's just horrible. And then you think of, you think of just his whole family and finding something like that out. And for people who knew him way better than I did, it's just crushing. It really is. I mean, Emmett Keenan, the activities director at Cathedral, he used the term devastating. He says he's just devastated by it. Mike Gibbons, when I was texting him back, he goes, devastated is how he goes, I describe myself, is what he said. And those guys knew him way better than I did. And it's just awful. There's no good way to put that.
Mike Gibbons had a really nice, touching tribute as well that we saw today on Twitter. And if you didn't get a chance to check it out, I would definitely do that. Mick, I kind of wanted to ask the perspective too. We talk about, nobody really knows how to react in this situation until you live through it. But one thing that I know, Mick, you do know is being a parent, right? And the process that goes through that. Are you able to even put into words? I mean, if you're Bob Motzko and his family, how to react to this, and kind of where do you go from here as a parent, just knowing your perspective, having children of your own?
Yeah, I and that's the other thing, I guess, that, when you were asking me about, when I found out what my reactions were, and one of them is you try to put yourself, I think human nature is that, right? I mean, you try to put yourself into, the extremes. When you see something really extreme, like, somebody wins the lottery or something like that, you try to put yourself in that person's shoes. What the heck would that feel like? Because so few people, go through something like that. Now here, of course, is the absolute opposite end of that, the absolute worst possible thing that you can think of. I mean, it's hard to even imagine because, like, with my kids, I mean, one of the things that, I worry about, even like, going out and playing hockey, right? You worry about your kid getting hurt, right? And my sons haven't had any, oh my gosh, haven't had any substantial injuries, in the game. But I remember one time I was coaching my oldest son, and he got hit. This was 2 years ago. He got hit and he went down. I thought I was coaching, and I didn't think it was a real clean play. And my son is down on the ice and he's kind of rolling around. And I just remember going out to the ice and just have that fear that something was really wrong, because my son usually just pops right back up, and he's usually back to the bench. If he's a little bit banged up or whatever, he'll come back to the bench as quick as he can, and he doesn't usually like just lay there. So I knew something was a little bit more significant, and so thankfully, I mean, he had the wind knocked out of him, and that's a startling thing for whatever he was, 10 years old at the time. That's all it was, right? So you think of just what runs through your mind in that quick of a really benign situation, and then you put yourself into what they're going through right now. I just can't wrap my head around it. And I'm sure that that's what's going on with them. I'm sure that Bob and Shelley are just beside themselves, trying to make sense out of it all. And, and I think you always want to protect your kids. And so I'm sure, I don't know, you would think, maybe you'd second guess yourself, maybe some, maybe Mack should have, been up with us, or whatever, or maybe I should have been with him that night. You know what I mean? I mean, those would be the type of things I think that would run through my head. I'm not saying that that's going through Bob's head, but if I was a parent, that would probably be going through my head. And that's tough. I mean, that's just, it's so hard to describe, I guess, how listen, you can take off one of my limbs, but let my kid be okay, right? I mean, that's just how you feel. I mean, if something awful has to happen, let it happen to me and not my kids. And so that's what I'm imagining is going on, and that's just so very difficult. I know. I remember when I was talking with Eric Rude, and Brian Domain and Jeremiah Minkle and I were talking about Mack just riding in the front of the bus. Mack would go on a couple of road trips with the Huskies, and and so we were talking about that. I brought that up to Eric, and Eric started to react to that, and Eric just lost it. Now Eric worked for Bob for, I think it was 5 seasons. And then he came back to St. Cloud State. So those two families, with the ages of their kids, are very closely aligned. So those two families are extremely tight. And the way Eric reacted, when you're that close to somebody, it's almost like one of your kids has died. And that's how it felt when I was talking with Eric. And so there are a lot of people really hurting about this. And like I told you guys before, I mean, I'm hurting, and I didn't know him that well, but I knew him enough to know that this is an awful, awful loss. And I've tried to, and what do you, here's a tough thing too. I mean, what the heck do you say to a parent who's going through something like that? I mean, what are the words for that? I mean, I'm somebody that, that's my job, is to try to put things into words. And I've really struggled to figure out what in the heck I would say to Bob right now, other than I'm sorry, and I feel so bad for you.
Mick, again, just a tragic story all around. But I know that we had asked you previous to the show if you had indeed talked to Bob or anybody else within the coaching staff. It sounds like you've reached out. And also, obviously, side note, you got to feel for, Bob's well-being too. This is unbelievably tragic. Something I don't think as any parent wants to ever go through. There's such a ripple effect to something like this as well. Can you inform the viewers if you indeed have had conversations with Bob, or I guess, and I know that since you've known him, you've told us before the show that, this is definitely something where, this is a type of moment in someone's life with this type of tragedy that, this could change somebody.
Yeah. And I mean, because again, you guys are asking me about putting yourself into his position. Well, how do you move on from this? I mean, and how are you gonna? What is your coping mechanism for something this horrible happening in your life? I don't. Obviously, we don't know how Bob is going to cope with this. In a direct message on Twitter, I sent him a note. I don't know if he's seen it. And I'm sure he's just been inundated with notes from people, but I wanted to at least express a couple of things to him there. I have had contact, as I was mentioning, with Mike Gibbons, and I reached out to Garrett Rapoin. Garrett obviously was an assistant coach up here, and now he's an assistant with Bob down at Minnesota. And I just reached out to Garrett, and I just told him, I said, listen, I'm hurting. And I said, and I didn't know him as well as you do. And so I can't even imagine what you're going through. I said, I just want you to know that I've been thinking about all you guys, and just, just my heart goes out to you guys. And he came back to me, and the other thing I wanted to make sure was that when I wrote the story I wrote about Mack, the big thing is that you want to make sure you get something like that right, and so I wanted to, when I reached out to Mike Gibbons and when I reached out to Garrett, I wanted them to see the story, because if there was something that was rubbing them wrong, or that they thought I was missing or something like that, I wanted to hear from them. And that's not a typical way I go about my journalism, but in an instance like this, it was important to me, just because Mack meant so much to so many different people. And So Rab said, no, he goes, you did a great service to him, and the family's going to appreciate what you did. And so that, coming from Garrett, that just meant the world to me. That he thought I got it right, and Gibby kind of said the same thing to me. And so I haven't, Garrett, kind of said that, obviously, I mean, it's been very tough on Bob, and Mike Gibbons has heard from, finally, actually, when Gibby and I were texting, he heard back from Bob, and Bob's definitely hurting deeply. That was apparent by what he shared with what was in that text. And so you just, one of the coolest moments was I went over to St. Cloud State. I had talked with Emmett Keenan, and I went down to St. Cloud State to talk to Brian Demain and Jeremiah Minkle. And when Brian saw me, I just kind of put my notepad down, and I didn't even know where to start with him, to talk with him. And Brian Demain just kind of walked up to me, put his arm around me, and gave me a hug, And that's kind of what you got to do, I guess, to, try to pull yourself through all this stuff. And that goes for everybody. And, and you hug, you hear that a lot, but boy, it really hammers home with something like this. You go and you hug your kid and you tell them that you love them, and you don't take any of it for granted.
Mick, this story continues to evolve, right? And the worst part about the evolution of the story, which sounds like will continue for probably quite some time, is that no matter what the answers you might get, it doesn't change some of the things that, have happened. For those who are watching this podcast, again, thanks everybody for joining us. At the time of recording here, this is Wednesday, July 28th. Just recently, James Lou was released from the hospital. He apparently turned himself in on his own accord. And then as of 6 o'clock this evening, Hennepin County posting that the Orono police had charged him initially with criminal vehicular homicide. So, when we talk about these sorts of things, and, you mentioned before, Mick, the avoidance of what this could have been, right? We're certainly going to be wanting to hear some of the answers that this guy will probably have to hear, and obviously what the authorities have gotten. But I guess for Huskies fans, for Gophers fans too, for their coach, I guess, for Bob, I think the big question is, and we talked a little bit about this pre-show, but for someone like Bob, does he double down and coach, or is this, hard to say, but this could certainly be a life moment where maybe you reevaluate. And I suppose that, as you had mentioned, this is going to be a time for Bob Motzko to really kind of think of where he's headed next. Is that not correct?
Well, again, I try to put myself in his situation, and how do you take that next step? One way, I guess, with any bad thing that kind of goes on with you is like just finding some sort of outlet to pour all kinds of energy and focus into, to keep whatever it is that's bothering you, at least more at bay for a better part of the day. Bob is somebody that is a tireless worker. That's something I've always thought that about Bob. I've always thought that Bob was working about 6.5 days a week. So I'm not sure if he has many more hours in the day that he could, dedicate to hockey. But does he do that? Does he take a leave of absence? Depending on where we all, any tragedy, any really awful thing that happens in anybody's life it takes you a certain amount of time to get to where you're coping with it, so where you can handle things on a day-to-day basis. As you know, I mean, with being a Division I coach, it's every hour that, it's like a 20-hour-a-day job, right? Even in the off season, because they're worried about recruiting and they're worried about guys working out and checking in with them, checking in with recruits, checking in with their own, the players that are coming back. So it's constantly, they're constantly going. I think actually, and this is going to sound weird, but like NHL coaches probably have it easier than college coaches do, because like they get to the end of the season and they just, management's going to do what management's going to do, right? And then I come back and I go to fall camp and I see what we're going to deal with. That's not the case with college coaches. And so I don't know how he's going to handle it. And I don't know how long his grieving process is going to take. You just wish for him that he finds the healthiest and best ways, and same goes for everybody in his family, right? That they find the best ways that they can, and if they need professional help to get through a situation like this, which is totally understandable. I think one of the great things, I guess, that's happened here in recent years is we're starting to get to a point where mental health things people are starting to view it a lot more like mental health is just a health issue, is what it is. And so you hope that if anybody in that family needs the help to get through it, that they are able to get that help, and that are able to get back to being close to the people that we all know them to be, or whatever. Bob's a terrific hockey coach. It's well documented. He's won everywhere he's gone. He's won gold medals for the national team. He's been a great ambassador for the game, I think. I think he's did a great job here. Has done a great job of turning things back around down at the U. So you hope that he gets to do what he's passionate about, which is coaching, and he's still got some time left in him, to coach before he retires. Now, it's hard for me to imagine Bob retiring, because Bob is so passionate about hockey. But I just wish him and his family all the best here trying to get through all this.
As do we as well. My final question on the subject here, Mick. Obviously, this is one of those events that when you think about the game of hockey takes a severe, backseat in all of this. But at the same time, the hockey community is also a part of this as well. And I think that everybody who knows Bob's situation, leaving the university, St. Cloud State University, and going to the University of Minnesota, I think the matchup that we had, looking forward to a lot of exciting things this season, was that matchup October 15th and 16th, that home and home between St. Cloud and the Gophers. If Bob does decide to return to coaching, and even if he doesn't, whenever he is back at the Herb Brooks National Hockey Center in St. Cloud, how much do you think it means, that game has now taken a different dynamic and a different perspective on Bob Motzko and what he means to the people of St. Cloud and this university? What do you expect and hope from St. Cloud and Gophers fans should they be in attendance if Bob is behind the bench that weekend?
And listen, I understand, fans are passionate, right? And there's always the work, the feeling of, St. Cloud State always has had that, right? Where we're kind of we always, when I was at school there or whatever, we always felt like, well, everybody looked at us as the second tier of whatever. And so, so when Bob left and went to the University of Minnesota, that of course, plays into some of how people view the university. And conversely, the people who are here and who have been passionate St. Cloud State fans, they felt a bit scorned, by it. And so I understand all those feelings, right? It's not like I've never been a sports fan, I'm still doing this because I enjoy sports. So I understand where people are coming from with that. But, given, what's happened, I don't know, when you're talking to me right now, at the end of July, what would I hope to see happen if Bob is here? I would hope, people would show support, maybe, and now for the, when Chuck Glosson introduces now for the University of Minnesota, whatever, okay, boo all the players or whatever. But, maybe in this instance, for not only because of what this awful tragedy has been, but also because of what Bob did when he was here. And Bob turned St. Cloud State back around and took him to that first Frozen Four, won the first, WCHA regular season title here when he was here, won the first NCHC championship when he was here, for all that, for what he did. And when people talk about the culture at St. Cloud State, you have to give Bob credit for a lot of that, because that started with Bob. All that stuff that people talk about with the locker room and the way those guys feel about each other, that starts at the top, right? And so I think I'd like to see, I guess, see him get appreciated for that, even if it's just, okay, you can boo him the rest, he's yelling at the ref or whatever, about some call, you can boo him or whatever at that point or whatever. But maybe for that first time that he gets introduced, and with what all he's gone through, I'm really hoping he hears something positive, just because he's done a lot for a lot of people.
No question about it. It wouldn't surprise me that if both universities paid some type of respect, either with a jersey patch or a helmet sticker, no question that, and we saw this on social media too, Mick, that Western Michigan, North Dakota, UMD, all expressing the same thing. As the hockey, we may be foes on the ice, but off, we're all one big community. And it was very, very powerful for me to see the support that very quickly transpired for Bob and his family throughout this spot. Mick, as always, we'll leave it at that. We do appreciate your time. Obviously, as this story continues to evolve, we are confident that you'll be on top of it. Again, for those of you, Mick Hatten with the Red, please check them out. A lot of great work that happens on that website, a lot of in-depth analysis, a lot of in-depth interviews. It's well worth a read and a listen for those of you who are unfamiliar with their work. They do a fantastic job, and no question that we'll be continuing with the talk and the text as things unfold. But for now, Mick, again, we appreciate your insight. Wish it was under better circumstances, but again, we'll be chatting in the future. And again, thanks for your time.
Well, thanks for having me on, Nick and Noah, and actually thanks for the forum to kind of talk. I'm not sure who will hear it or who won't hear it or whatever, but to be able to express just what it's been like, I guess, as somebody who's been around that family and been around Mack a little bit, to be able to express that a little bit, it helps. One of the things my boss told me, he goes, one of the things you can do in journalism is to help people with the grieving process, letting them express themselves or whatever. It helps you get through it. And so I appreciate you guys giving me the time here on here. I really do.
Well, Mick, when you talk about how many people are going to listen, if you give us the Rink Live contract, we'll get a lot of people to listen, I think, really quickly. So, but I just wanted to reach out, obviously, before we say sayonara to you. Thank you for doing what you do. And I know that that might sound kind of odd, but there is a piece of journalism, and obviously in situations like this where you are the guy that has to kind of wade through things that a lot of people don't want to or don't, want to engage in. So thank you for your coverage. And obviously we're going to stay tuned on that as well. And we wish you the best as well going through the process, as we all are. So excited to have you on. And hey, don't make your podcast look so good, because you're making us look bad, Mick.
Well, thanks for all the kind words. I greatly appreciate it. And thanks so much again for having me on, guys. It's nice talking with you guys anytime you guys want.
Thanks, Mick. I do appreciate it. We'll be in touch.
All right.
Thanks, Mick. And Nick, like we mentioned, a unique interview, but a really good one. Always fun to catch up with Mick. Just, really great to us and stuff. Not a guy that we really, I guess, interact with a whole lot, but when we do, just one of those guys that, haven't really had anything bad to say about Mick. He's just been very professional, very awesome to us, very fun to talk to, and always interesting. If you get a chance to ever watch Mick Hatten do a post-game interview and his scribble speak, if you will, on his notepad when he flips his notepad, it's kind of an interesting little process to watch. It does a fantastic job. Nick, before I get your thoughts on that, I also kind of wanted to touch on, as I had mentioned briefly, our experience with Bob Motzko, kind of a funny little Motzkoism, if you will. For those who know Bob, kind of being Bob as you will. And as Mick had kind of alluded to, it's sometimes electronically can be hard to reach at times. And when we had him on last July, it was interesting. We were supposed to have him on, I think it was like a Wednesday or a Thursday that week. And he texts us at about 7:45 on Sunday night and just says, "I need to change the time of the show." And we're like, okay, like what do you need to do? And he goes, tomorrow. We're like, okay, all we can do is like 8 o'clock in the morning. That's the only time it's going to work. So he agrees, whatever. And he jumps on the Zoom call. And the first thing he says to us is, how long is this going to take? And why are we doing this so early? And we're just, again, remember, this is episode 18. This is our first big primo guest. And we're like, oh boy, this might not go so well, but fantastic interview. If you haven't got a chance, it's our July 4th special from last year. A really great interview with Bob, getting to talk about his time at St. Cloud State and how much he missed being a Husky and, what that rivalry and things have meant to him. But Nick, what are your kind of closing thoughts on, this situation, the interview with Mick, and kind of what we have coming up next?
Sure. Again, the hockey community, we've talked about this all the time, right? How close-knit, how supportive it is. And, this is one of those where you do lean on each other to kind of help you get through it. And I don't even know if that's the right way to say it, right? I don't know how, in Bob's shoes, how you get through something like this. Again, you and I know I've talked about where I've been through something quite devastating myself, but it's not the same. It just isn't the same. I can't imagine being a parent and having to bury your kid. I can't. And obviously the circumstances, from what we know and from what we might learn, don't certainly make it any easier. At the end of it, as a parent, I can only imagine it probably is the last thing on their mind. As far as how all they can think about is that, the wonderful child that they brought into the world is no longer with them. And I think for my closing thoughts here, Noah, and I think I speak for you and for I hope for Huskies Nation is to Bob, to Shelley, to Ella, and the entire Motzko family, the entire University of Minnesota Gopher hockey program. From St. Cloud State, here at the Huskies Warming Us podcast, we are here. We are supportive of you. We stand by you during this very difficult time. I wish there were words, Noah, that could do and explain and help comfort those who knew Mack the most, his friends, his schoolmates, his teammates. There just are no words that can offer the type of healing that we wanted to immediately, right? Well, what we can do is, again, like I said, as the hockey community, although the Gophers and the Huskies are wonderful rivals off ice, there's no question that when the skates are hung, when the jerseys are drying and the gloves are sitting on the rack and, they're sweaty and it's a great contest on the ice. There's no question that off the ice, it's one big giant family. And as that family, we mourn in the loss of Mack together. So again, Bob and Shelley, our thoughts and our prayers are with you during this very difficult time. And we wish you nothing but the utmost support moving forward from this day on. So again, can't say it enough. Just unbelievable tragedy, and again, just hoping for better days ahead.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself. And obviously, we're going to be tracking the story as it evolves, as it develops, and obviously tracking the health and well-being of the Motzko family, Huskies Nation, Gophers Nation, and the college hockey and the hockey world in general. I think it's important for all to embrace each other in this time. Speaking of embracing what's to come, here we do have episode number 72 that's going to be on the docket for us for the Huskies Warming House podcast on Sunday, as well as hopefully a guest coming up the next week. But for the Huskies Warming House podcast, I think that's who we are. That will do it for episode number 71 with Mick Hatten, and we will see you next time in the Den.
One-timer coming, they score! Ripped in! A bomb from Permix!
So Dana Rasmussen fires and she scores! Dana Rasmussen for the Huskies alongside
Dwayne Kaprizov in for a chance to win it! He scores! Kirill the Thrill is for real! Welcome to the NHL! A game winner!
St. Cloud Cathedral is now 42.6 seconds away from wrapping up the school's first ever title.